And good day once again, my fellow Americans, patriots, freedom lovers around the world. This is Mark Emery, founder of the National Action Task Force, and today we're going to talk about litigation finance, which is an absolutely intriguing concept which enables you to make a diligent investment for your own personal financial planning purposes, and at the same time support freedom, justice, and putting the mechanisms in place to stop corruption at all levels. So let's just get into it. This is a fascinating subject, and you might find it quite interesting on a number of levels. If you haven't heard of this before, you need to know that it is a growing industry. Litigation financing or funding is not only used by law firms across the country, but there are actual investment funds and hedge funds set up to provide funding for lawsuits simply because they are so lucrative, or at least they can be upon victory. All right? Look at the definition. Lawsuit funding or financing, litigation financing, it's basically a loan. It's also called pre-settlement loan. It's used by the person who needs to carry on the ongoing lawsuit, but requires cash to move the lawsuit forward. It's most commonly used in personal injury lawsuits and many other types of cases. After applying for the funding, the company evaluates the settlement, then offers money accordingly. Moreover, lawsuit financing eases the burden and decreases the pressure to settle early and cheap. So that's a standard definition. We might modify that in some ways, but you get the idea. It takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to prosecute a lawsuit. It's very time intensive, and of course, the assistants and counsel, those who are involved in the legal matters, have really invested a lifetime learning what it is that they know to be able to move these things forward. So it is a very significant investment. However, it can be very lucrative when prosecuted successfully. And that's the whole idea. Matching a good, potentially lucrative lawsuit with those who are able to move that forward financially. Simple concept. In fact, major players around the world are getting in on the action because it is so lucrative. You see a list here of private capital firms in the USA, the UK, and around the world that are actually raising funds for this simple purpose, to fund lawsuits. This is big business. All right, and so you might ask why? Well, it's one simple reason. The return on investment is potentially very great, very interesting. And this is why that anyone who is managing a portfolio of savings, investments, perhaps retirement funds, should give some serious consideration to allocating a portion of their portfolio into this area, simply because of the ROI. Take a look at the history of what you've been getting on the returns on your current investments. Are those satisfactory, or could they use a boost? Where are you in terms of your retirement plan? Most people don't have a retirement plan, or if they do, it's not sufficient to carry them forward in their retirement years. This would be one thing to consider in advancing in that plan in some way. Here's an example. Montana court affirms record $52 million jury verdict in a lawsuit against a bank. In fact, the court rejected a cap on that lawsuit, and they went ahead and allowed the $52 million as opposed to the statutory cap of $10 million. So juries are very often quite favorable towards claimants when they've been denied their rights, deprived their security, deprived of their liberty, their freedom, their property, their assets. So This is big business. Now, many firms require, in order to participate, that you generally must be an accredited investor. In other words, you've got a significant net worth and annual income, and you've got to make declarations of such. And unless you are an accredited investor, they don't allow you to participate. All right? That's not going to be the case here. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So here's a typical model of how the typical arrangements are made. The investor capital comes into the claimant via the counsel, and that goes to provide the legal experts and prosecution costs. In many cases, if you're dealing with a fund or some business, there's operating costs of the business that come out of that, and the net remainder goes into the litigation. And once there's a resolution from that litigation in a positive manner, an award is granted by the court. Those returns then go back to the claimant, who then shares a portion of that with the investors. Okay, it's a very simple model, not too complicated. So let's look at some numbers hypothetically as to how this could work. Let's say 1 unit, in our example, 1 unit of a trust that's set up exclusively for this purpose is $500. So a $500 contribution would entitle someone to 1 unit. A $5,000 contribution would entitle them to 10 units, 50,000, 100 units. Okay, so you get the idea. Now let's say a hypothetical award is $25 million. And for assistance in attaining that award, the National Action Task Force has an agreement in place to share 35% of that, which would be $8.75 million. All right, now the pool to share is 20% of that, or $1.75 million would be shared with those unit holders in the bonus pool for the litigation finance. And so let's just say there's 50 units involved in that round of funding. So in this example, and it is just a hypothetical example, 50 units into 1.75 million is a value of $35,000 for each unit. So what we're seeing is $500 turning into, hypothetically, $35,000 in this example. That's not a promise, it's not a guarantee, it's a hypothetical illustration of what the numbers could break down to be. Now, 35,000 on 500, what is that? That's 70x. 70 times your investment. How long will it take for that to be obtained? Well, nobody knows. Let's just say it's a year. This isn't something that happens overnight. These things take time. An award might be granted. It could be appealed. That appeal could take several months. So the timing is the issue. So we have to look at this in a longer term scenario. But for 70x, I think we can afford to do that. So that makes things quite interesting. Now the way this is set up, there are 2 scenarios for distribution. The first one is that each round of funding has a minimum participation level to qualify for full pro rata distribution, like we've seen in the previous example. Okay? So that previous example basically showed 50 units participating in that round, and each unit was allocated its pro rata amount of the pool at that time. Okay? Now, if the second option is that if the minimum level of participation is not reached, and that's preset for that round, then the distribution is capped at 10 times the unit contributions. So if the next round of funding, the target is set at $100,000 to assure that there's plenty of capital available to handle appeals and prolonged litigation, then if that $100,000 is not attained, that minimum level of participation, then those who are participating would be capped at 10 times their contribution. Which even at that, where else do you find that in the markets today? Very rare. Okay? So that round of funding is concluded when the next payout occurs. Okay? So the industry standard typically is that you would fund one claimant in one case. And your investment will either sink or swim with the results of that one case. If that case gets shot down and is not successful, then you would lose your investment. So that's a bit risky. Now, with the NATF, your participation is funding all the claimants that NATF is working with. Okay, so your investment is not tied to one case. Your round of funding is next in line to the next successful case, whichever one that might be. So if the next case that is up is not successful, that's not a problem, because the one following that may be, and you could benefit from the one following, or the one thereafter, or whichever one comes next in terms of success. All right, so you've got that extra level of security the way this is structured. So right now, what's in the pipeline? As of March 31st, there are currently, it's actually more than 9 cases filed. We've got probably closer to 15 that are either filed or on their way. Claimants are coming in almost daily. You can imagine that corruption and abuse, violation of rights is rampant everywhere, and so there are no shortage of claims. All right, but even with the initial 9 cases that have been filed, just with those 9 cases, there was over $200 million in damages that are currently pending. And in those cases, the defendants really have no escape if the law or the facts on the record or established procedure mean anything. Okay, so that just gives you an idea. 200 million, and the pipeline has just been opened up. More is coming down the pike. So what kind of cases are we dealing with? Typically, these are violations of God-given constitutionally protected rights violations. These could be cases, denial of due process. You hear it all the time. Oh, but they just ignored what I had to say and rolled right over me in the courtroom. Happens all the time. Unlawful arrest. This is getting to be a rampant problem. Unlawful search. Fraud on the court. Unlawful distraint, withholding of your property. Seizing of your property without proper process. Malicious prosecution. Ultra vires acts, where actors act outside their scope of authority. That's what ultra vires is. No authority to deprive you of your rights or your property, and there's many more causes that come up on a regular basis, but this gives you an idea. What kind of defendants are these damages being claimed against? Well, we can talk about city attorneys, prosecutors, district attorneys, attorney generals, belligerent judges, errant law enforcement officers, other state actors, private actors, companies, corporations, individuals, could be anybody, but the top half a dozen are generally the most common. And these claims are most often done in their personal capacity. So that makes it interesting. I think you see the value here, all right? But you need to understand, yes, this is a business. This is an investment with an intended return. And it's also much more than just the money that we're concerned with. The money is the grease for the wheels that makes this work. But above everything else, this is really about freedom and justice and correcting corrupt officials and letting them know that there are people who will stand on the law, who will stand on God-given rights, and will enforce those to the extent that the law provides. Hopefully, that's as far as we need to go. But that's what it's about. Now, this is not available to the public. This is a members-only activity. And so if this is of interest to you, you need to inquire what it takes to become a member, to involve yourself in our private membership association. And that being the case, it's very simple, very easy. It's not difficult at all. To get the details, contact the person that has referred you to this presentation and get the details. They will guide you, and hopefully this will be an important part of your overall estate plan, your retirement program, your family's legacy. So with that, thank you for your attention. Take care. God bless. We hope to talk to you soon. Bye for now.